Hi, and welcome to Salary Negotiation for people that hate to negotiate. I'm Josh Puetz, Principal Software Developer at Dev. A few years ago, I went to a Ruby conference and met lots of great people. One of them I got to talking to about salary with, and I asked how much she made, and she asked how much I made. We compared salaries, and I was really surprised because she was much newer to the industry than I was, but made a lot more than I did. So I asked, how did you manage that? And she said, well, my very first job, I didn't make very much, but my second job, I negotiated my starting salary. And since then, I've negotiated ever since and have made more and more. This was an absolute revelation to me. I had never considered that you could negotiate an offer from a company. I thought salary was a fixed price, like a price on a can of soup at a grocery store. Turns out I'm not the only one. According to a Robert Half salary survey in 2018, only 39% of workers negotiated their last salary. So why should you bother negotiating salary? It's kind of uncomfortable, right? Well, there's two main benefits. Number one, of course, you get a higher salary now. And number two, you get a higher salary potentially at your next job, and those effects compound over the course of your career. A 2009 survey from Michelle Marks at George Mason University and Crystal Harrod at Temple University found that the average worker that negotiated got a $5,000 increase in their starting salary. Now, if we took that $5,000 and extrapolated it for someone starting their career at 25 years old, say they had a 40-year career and we assumed 5% increases yearly, you're looking at an increase of $634,000 over the entire life of their career, just from that initial $5,000 increase. Okay, so I don't like to negotiate, and maybe you're like me and you don't like to negotiate either. So a strategy is really going to help, and we're going to go over it step by step. So first, before we start talking individual steps, the number one thing I want you to take from this talk, rule number one, never give the first number. What's the first number? The first number is the answer to a question you're going to get very quickly as you negotiate, which is, what salary would you like to make? Now, never, ever answer this question. And never answer this question in any of its various forms. You might get things like, how much are you currently making? Now, in some states in the US, you can't actually ask that question legally. You might actually get questions like, well, what kind of ballpark were you looking to make? Or what number did you have in mind? There's all sorts of ways that a recruiter will ask you this question. Never give the first number. How much you want to make is one of the very few points of leverage you have in a negotiation. Don't give it away. Why? Well, you don't know what the budget of the employer has budgeted for this position. You don't know what kind of pay bands they have. That's how little and how much they pay people of the same job title. You don't know what you're worth yet, probably. We're going to take care of that in a little bit. And lastly, you don't have an offer. When a recruiter asks you how much would you like to make before they've made you an offer, it's what I call a no-but situation. They're saying, no, we're not going to hire you, but we might if you were cheap enough. Instead, in negotiation, you want to get to a yes-if situation. Okay, but you might be saying, wait, what if they ask me X, Y, Z? No, you never want to answer this question. Always delay until you have an offer. When you have an offer, you're in what I call a yes-if situation. Yes, I will work for you if you can get to a particular price. Some common ways you can use to sidestep this question, and I do recommend you practice it, are talking about how the position isn't the same as the current position you're in. Making sure you want to be a fit for this position before you talk about salary. And just flat up, if a recruiter is being really hard with you and saying, we cannot proceed until you tell me what your desired salary is, you can turn it back on them and say, well, you have a range budgeted, I'm sure. Tell me what your range is and we can talk. You can also be a little nicer about this and say, well, I'm going to assume that you're paying fair market values. So let's talk about the position and then we can talk about salary. Okay, now that number one rule is out of the way, let's talk about the plan. We're going to find your market rate. Develop a minimum acceptable salary, negotiate the salary, and then negotiate the benefits. So first, finding your market rate. I've said market rate a couple times now. What do I mean? Market rate is the fair value of your skills and experience and what you could expect someone with your skills and experience in an average position at this average job to make. How do you find your market rate? There's a couple of ways. The internet is a great place to start. Sites like Glassdoor, PayScale, Salary, Levels, all have lots of filters. You can input your job description, how many years you have in the industry, and where you're physically located, and you'll get a great graph of what you could expect that position to pay. You could ask friends in the industry. That's what I did in the story at the beginning of this talk. A lot of people will be glad to talk to you about their salary, and it's helpful to talk to them and get a comparison across many different employers. And finally, you can ask your coworkers at your current job, but I'd caution you to be careful with this. Keep in mind when you're asking your coworkers at your current job what they're making, you're getting data points all from your current employer. If your employer pays pretty low in the market, the numbers are going to be skewed, so just keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about a minimum acceptable salary. A minimum acceptable salary is the absolute minimum salary you would consider to do this particular job. It's a number you hope to make more than. It's a number you'd be happy to make at this job. And you absolutely will not, under any circumstances, accept less than this number for this job. So what goes into setting a minimum acceptable salary? Well, of course, your current salary does. You probably don't want to make less than you're currently making. Your market rate also goes into this number. You should probably aim to be somewhere around that market rate and adjust it depending on your skills and experience. There's two other things we can use to adjust the minimum acceptable salary, and that's how badly does the recruiter or employer that you're interviewing with want you on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is they really could care less about you, and 10 is they are absolutely desperate to hire you. Another number you can look at is how badly do you need this job, again, on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is you don't really care much if you get the job or not, and 10 is you're absolutely desperate for this job and you need it to make ends meet. So let's go through an example because numbers really help here. Let's say you're currently making $50,000. You've done some market research and it shows that in this position, the market average is about $60,000. The recruiter that you're talking to has shown pretty strong desire to hire you, so we'll call that an 8. You're mildly interested in the job, so we'll call that a 6. So let's set a minimum acceptable salary slightly above average. We'll say $62,000. Now, I got really excited and slid ahead one slide because I want to point out that you should decide on your minimum acceptable salary before you have an offer on the table. You want to do this work when you're not under any time pressure, when you're not flustered, when an employer's not waiting on you to make a decision. Do this work ahead of time and then write down your number so you have it when you go into negotiations. Also, stock options are not salary. When I say salary, we are talking strictly about base salary. Stock options are great, but you can't pay rent with them and you can't buy groceries with them. Consider them an extra. They're like vacation or expense reimbursement. Don't factor them into your minimum acceptable salary. All right, now let's negotiate our salary. You've got an offer, congratulations. Now the hard part begins. What are we gonna do? Here are the steps. First, we're gonna buy some time. We're gonna develop a counteroffer and we're gonna deliver it. We're going to prepare for a final counteroffer from the company. We'll negotiate any last-minute benefits, and then we'll make the decision. Okay, so the very first thing you should do is ask for some time to think this over. It's a really big decision, and a company is going to understand that. Ideally, you want a couple days to consider their offer, and really what you're doing that time is developing your counteroffer. Always take a few days over to think about the offer. You can tell the company that you'd like a few days to think about it. If you have a significant other, you can tell the company you need to discuss it with them. Anything to get a couple days will be helpful. Always make a counteroffer. That's the second thing I'm going to emphasize here. Why should we always make a counteroffer? Well, because you adhered to rule number 1 and you did not name the first value, the company is the first one throwing out an initial offer. They're setting the spot where negotiations are going to begin. So you're going to be able to play with the percentages based off that number. they've already thrown off a number and they're not going to be surprised when you adjust it a little bit. There's really very little downside to negotiating and throwing out a counteroffer, so you should always do it. There's two scenarios we're going to consider. One, the company makes you a counteroffer that is, the company makes you an offer that is at or above your minimum acceptable salary. The second situation we're going to consider is when the company makes you an offer that is below your minimum acceptable salary. So first, what happens if they make you an offer above or at your minimum acceptable salary? Great. For rule of thumb, we're going to counteroffer between 10 and 20%. Why those numbers? Well, 10% is a very small amount to adjust their initial offer. It's probably already factored into the range of salaries they would offer. 20% is more sizable. It's going to make a real difference to your bottom line, but still not so big that it's going to look out of place on someone's budget sheet. Next, we're going to go look at that multiplier value that we talked about before, and that's a combination of how much they need you and how much you want the job. We'll take how much they need you on a scale of 0 to 10, and we'll subtract how much you want the job on a scale from 0 to 10. We'll take that number as a percentage and add it to our base 10% counteroffer, and that's going to be our counteroffer number. So let's go back to some real numbers for an example. Our minimum acceptable salary, if you'll recall, was $62,000. Let's say the company offers us $65,000 for this position. We already said they had a strong desire to hire us, and that's an 8. And we have a fairly decent desire to take the job. That's a 6. So we'll take 8 minus 6, and that gives us a multiplier of 2. We're going to add that 2 to our 10% base, and we'll come up with a counteroffer percentage of 12%. The initial offer the company made, $65,000 times 12%, gives us $7,800. So that means our counteroffer will be $72,800. Now I know what you might be thinking, that seems kind of high. Well, it's really not. It's a 12% increase in the number they initially threw out. Remember, we made them say the first number. The second situation that might occur, they offer you a number that is below your minimum acceptable salary. Okay, don't panic. We'll go back to our multiplier number, we'll figure that out again, and then we'll also consider whether that plus the 10% is higher or lower than our minimum acceptable salary. Back to our example. We said our minimum acceptable salary was $62,000. Now let's say the company offers us less than that. They offer us $55,000. They still have a strong desire to hire us, that's an 8. We still have a medium desire to take the job, that's a 6. That means our multiplier is a 2. We'll add 2 to 10%, that gives us a multiplier of 12%. We'll take the company's offer, $55,000, and take 12% off of it, add to it. That gets us a counteroffer of $61,600. Now that's less than our minimum acceptable value, a minimum acceptable salary of $62,000. So instead, we will just offer the greater of those amounts, our $62,000 minimum acceptable salary. Okay, next, let's deliver the counteroffer. Now, we already asked for some time to consider this, so hopefully we're doing this over email. We want to use email if possible because it lets us hit our base points that we're the perfect person for this job and firmly put down why we think we're worth this money. We're going to put out the counteroffer and then we'll wait. Here's an example script you can use. Hi, so-and-so. Thanks very much for the offer you recently made. Here's a great place to put a paragraph about why you're the best person for this job, and then just lay it on the line. You offered $65,000. I'd be more comfortable if we could settle on $72,800. I feel this amount reflects the experience that I bring and the importance of the position. And then finally, I look forward to hearing from you at our next meeting at time and date here. Here are the main points you want to hit. Right away state you want to discuss the salary. Reinforce why you're the best person for the job. Put out your counter offer and reinforce your next meeting time. After a couple of days, the company will get back to you with what's probably going to be their final offer. So this means we have a couple days to think about the final discussion. In the final discussion, they're going to throw out a number that is between their initial offer and your counteroffer. And you want to prepare for what that's going to be and what different scenarios it's going to play out. You also want to think about any potential benefits you want to attach to the offer: vacation, home office expense, conference travel. All right, so I like to think about this in thirds. Remember, they offered $65,000 and we counteroffered at $72,800. Let's split up into thirds. The top third, that would be $70,000 to $72,800. Great. I would say take that. The middle third, they offer between $67,500 and $70,000. Not bad, but maybe we could adjust that a little bit. You could say, well, I'm on board if you could do $70,000. They might come up. Or you could say, well, I could take that $67,500 if you can throw in an extra week of vacation, or if you can guarantee I travel to 2 conferences a year. And finally, the bottom third. This is where you have a little bit of leeway to play tough. If they offer between $65,000 and $67,500, say, I'm sorry, I can't accept any less than, say, $67,500, the top range of your bottom third. Finally, make the decision. The big part here is you have to be willing to say no. We did our homework on market rate. We wrote down a minimum acceptable salary. Trust those numbers. Trust that the number that you came up with is the absolute minimum you would accept to do this job. If the company can't make that, don't take the job. You're not going to be happy. And use benefits as a lever. If they can't quite get up to that minimum acceptable salary number, or they're really, really close and you want to get them over the line, throw in benefits, extra vacation, conference reimbursement. Those are all little extras that don't actually add to salary and are really easy for a company to throw in sometimes. Okay, we covered a lot of information really fast. So here are the main takeaways I want you to get out of this talk. Number 1, research your market worth. You can't negotiate unless you have that information. Number 2, develop a minimum acceptable salary. Do the work ahead of time and write it down. Number 3, always counter offer. They're expecting it. You made them throw out the first number. You've got room to negotiate. And finally, never, ever give the first number. Thanks very much. Here's a list of my references that I used while preparing this talk. Much of it is inspired by Josh Duty's excellent book, Fearless Salary Negotiation. You'll find a link to it here. You can read the whole book for free on his site. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so on Twitter at Josh Puetz. I'm on Dev, also as Josh Puetz, and my site, joshpuetz.com. And don't forget, leave me your questions about salary in the article comments over to the side. Thanks very much and have a great Codeland.